We're completely alive to the fact that documents provided by the bank may be incomplete or misleading, particularly if handled by the fraudsters. However, it would be simply impractical to carry out the re-review without access to the documentation that is available. Andrew has already explained some of the document management arrangements that have been made. But what you should also know is that we and our team look with considerable care both at what is present in the documentation and what is absent from it. Where the fraudsters or those acting under their direction were involved, we look at the documentation supplied with suspicion. What I can say is that in some cases we have considered so far, there is documentation missing that we would have expected to be present, and that, of course, has caused us suspicion. But equally, there are cases in which there is documentation present which is of assistance to the customer.
Naturally, we understand a customer's desire to know where they are in the queue. But we feel it's important to retain flexibility over which customers' cases we review and when, because we understand that people's circumstances can change, often quite suddenly. We need to retain the ability to move a customer's case up the order if need be. We therefore don't think it will be helpful to give a customer a specific group or order where this may have to change down the line. Andrew is going to say a little bit more about that shortly.
Approximately a third of the 175 customers who opted in requested prioritization. If you didn't initially request prioritization when you opted in, and there's been a change in your personal circumstances, and you now feel that your case should be considered a priority, please let us know as soon as possible. When anyone's personal circumstances change and they need to be urgently prioritized, that inevitably involves moving someone else further down the queue, which is a difficult and frankly sometimes impossible decision for the panel. We cannot guarantee to change the order in which cases are considered, as it disrupts the process and creates its own delays, as well as disappointment for other customers. Frustratingly, due to personal issues and sensitivities, we cannot go into further detail, which might help explain things a little better. We hope you will understand that there is no easy answer to this issue.
As Andrew has said, we are continually looking for ways to improve the speed at which we can address cases. And where it helps, additional resource has been and continues to be taken on board. However, as we've tried to emphasise in each of our updates, it is the three of us panel members that have the responsibility for making the decisions in each case. The major constraint on progress, therefore, is the time that it inevitably takes the three of us to review, digest, examine, and analyse all of the information received during our process, both documentary and otherwise, and come to a view. As I've said earlier, the cases we've considered so far have been complex, and we're not able to tell whether a minded to decision will be challenged by the customer or the bank. We do set time limits on responses, but where a minded to decision is challenged, it's incumbent on us to consider the information provided carefully and conscientiously, and this inevitably takes more time. If there is a challenge, we have to set aside the work we've commenced on other cases in order to consider the further information and arrive at a final decision. We then have to produce the final decision document, which sets out how we've arrived at our final decision so that customers can understand our reasoning.
We know this has been a concern for some customers. Unfortunately, it isn't within our gift as a panel to decide on this issue. We have, however, had a number of conversations with the stakeholder groups and the bank about ensuring that customers can be properly financially supported through the process. But ultimately, this is an issue for the bank to decide on.
As you will know from our published methodology, the panel must determine whether someone was a victim of the IAR fraud as defined. This is what was recommended by Sir Ross Cranston. We recognise the anxiety that this part of the process is causing, given the upsetting and difficult experiences many of you have been through. We've had a number of discussions with the bank and the stakeholder groups about how to try to avoid this part of the process, but it's not been possible to secure a satisfactory agreement. It remains, therefore, that we must be able to conclude as a starting point that an individual or the company with which that individual was associated was affected by the IAR fraud, and that as a result, the customer or the customer's company suffered financial loss that would not otherwise have been suffered but for the IAR fraud. As explained in Sir Ross Cranston's report and as set out on our website, it is not simply the case that if you were awarded D&I compensation during the customer review, you will automatically be awarded D&C compensation during the re-review. Some D&I compensation was given to some customers who simply had contact with the fraudsters, but who were not actually financially affected by the fraudulent actions. There's one thing we would mention in the light of our experiences so far. As we've said, we do not know when a minded to decision is to be challenged, and when it is, it affects our work schedule. That such a decision can be challenged is, of course, an integral part of the re-review process, and we as a panel are perfectly comfortable with it. It's a valuable safeguard against matters being overlooked. However, we did make it clear on the website that we hoped that by the time we came to produce the minded to decision, all relevant documents and information would have been identified and considered. Whilst, of course, things can be missed, it's not very satisfactory for the panel to be provided with completely new information only after we produce the minded to decision, because we then have to revisit provisional conclusions already made. A lot of work by our team, and indeed by us, can be wasted as a result. It also inevitably disrupts our schedule and impacts on the speed with which we can deal with other customers' cases, all of whom have been waiting a long time for their claims to be considered properly. So if you have advisors working for you, please can you try to ensure that everything you would like us to consider is presented to us before we consider our minded to decision. Doing so will help us deal with your claim and other people's claims too. If you don't have advisors working for you, that's absolutely fine. But if you could make a note in advance of meeting us or communicating your claim to us, of all the things you would like us to consider, we would very much appreciate it.
We recognise that customers value regular updates from the panel, and we're trying to provide monthly progress reports. As a first port of call for any question you may have for the panel, please can you check the website on www.foskettpanel.com. It contains a lot of helpful information, both about the process and also a dedicated FAQ section that we regularly update. If you want to send us an email, our communications team aim to reply within a week. Given the panel's caseload, however, it isn't always possible for them to send you a detailed reply that quickly. We consider it very important to maintain contact. Please bear in mind, though, that dealing with customer inquiries tends to divert us from working on cases, so do bear with us if there's a slight delay in responding.
We hope that this video has answered some of the questions you may have had. Equally, we hope it gives you a better flavour of what confronts us than you had before.